All right, we have a special guest speaker today. It's Ryan Martens, my son, and my wife's son too, Laura. And just happened to work out that way. And so he is living in the Philippines. He's serving in that country, and so he's not here physically, but he's recorded a message for us to view. And so the message is going to be split up in two. There's the section there of the message itself, and then there's going to be a 10-minute session that can't be broadcast, but we'll send a link for you to watch that later on. He'll give more details about his work that he is doing there. And during the message, he's going to have, I think it's 3 times, where he'll be pausing and inviting us to dialogue. So just people that are close in proximity to you can spend some time responding to the question that he is posing to us. And then the message will end, but it's kind of truncated because it's supposed to be another 10 minutes after that, but we're not going to watch that. So just know it's going to be that ending that you won't, it's not a proper ending in one sense, but we will end the service properly. All right, so let's go ahead and watch the video from Ryan.
Well, good morning, Glencairn. It is such a blessing and a privilege to be here with you guys on this Sunday morning. It's actually Sunday evening for me right now. Here in the Philippines, we're 8 hours ahead. So greetings from the future. I am Ryan Martens. Many of you know me, son of Richard Martens, and I am married to a Filipina. We live here in the Philippines with our son, Ezrafael, and we are doing Move In. So this is, here we have a picture of us. Here's me with my family sitting on the grass there. I first moved into the Philippines in 2015, and then we got married in 2019. We're doing Move In together, and then Ezra was born just a year ago, and he's been doing Move In with us as well. He's actually the best move-inner. Here's a picture of him getting to know some of the kids in the neighborhood. And this is the community that we live in Metro Manila is called Maharlika Village. It is a Muslim slum. So our neighbors are all, almost all of them are Muslim. And almost all of them are also very, very poor as well. So often they will have only enough money to buy rice, and then they can't, and that'll be their meal for the day. Or they have loans that they can't pay. They have trouble getting jobs. You know, all the trappings that come with poverty. That's the everyday experience of our neighbors in Maharlika Village. Muslims are a minority in the Philippines. And so they also have the same trappings that a minority person might face in the city. So why would we choose to live in a place like Maharlika Village? Well, that question I will answer at the end. We're going to flow into that. So, but first of all, let us go to the parable of the good Muslim. That's going to be what we are talking about today. This might be a familiar parable for some of you, although I'm using a bit of a different translation. But I think you'll be able to follow along. So where are we going this morning? We have the story. That's where we're going to start. Start with the story. Then we're going to have reflection, a time of intentional reflecting on what we just heard and what might be the meaning of some of the aspects of this story for us. And then there's a challenge in this story, I think, for us, that we're going to allow the Holy Spirit to challenge us in that way. And that challenge will also lead us to a discussion of Move In. What is Move In? What's my story, Move In, and what is God doing in the Philippines nowadays? So let's get started with the story. You can turn in your Bible to Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 36. It will also be up on the screen. But before we read it, I have a question. Is it fair, because when you see it in your Bible, it's going to say the parable of the Good Samaritan. So, but here we're talking about the parable of the good Muslim. Is it fair to switch the Samaritan for a Muslim? Why would I do that? Is that even okay to do that? Um, a little background, perhaps. First, the Samaritans claimed to be the descendants of Joseph. The one of the 12 sons of Israel. And that's probably true, but they also intermarried with the Assyrians and other nations after the Assyrian exile. So the Jews, which this was Jesus' audience, Jesus was a Jew and he was talking to Jews. The Jews viewed Samaritans as unclean, and they believed that they would become unclean even if they ate with a Samaritan. You associate with a Samaritan and become unclean. That's how the Jews view the Samaritans. So, unsurprisingly, they would tend to avoid the Samaritans quite a bit. They would view them sometimes even as evil, bad, unclean, quite negative connotations, real racial conflict. So I'm wondering, what is the modern equivalent for Canadian Christians? What is the Samaritan for us? And there's probably many answers to that. But one of those, I think, could be Muslims. Many Christians view Muslims as, we don't use that word, unclean, but that idea. Muslims are unclean. They're kind of sinful. They're a little bit scary. Maybe they're terrorists. Maybe, you get the idea. So we're switching the Samaritan for the Muslim, and hopefully that will bring out some new aspects of the story for us, which would have been maybe closer to the original intent of the story. So that's the spirit we're in right now. So let's go and look at the parable of the good Muslim. Let's read this. Let's get rid of my face there. So, a certain seminary professor stood up to test Jesus. He said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said, "What is written in the Bible? How do you read it?" You're a seminary professor. You should be good at this, reading the Bible. So the professor answered and said, "You shall love the Lord your God from all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "That's right," said Jesus. "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." Okay, so that could have been the end of the story right there. You got the right answer. Do this and you will live. Good job. But he wanted to justify himself. He wanted to justify himself. He wanted to put himself in the right. So he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? Is it a Muslim? Is it a Christian? Who is my neighbor?" So Jesus replied with a parable. Here's the parable. A certain man was traveling from Davao to Cotabato and fell into the hands of robbers, who both stripped him and beat him. After inflicting blows on him, they went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by coincidence, a certain pastor was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Then there was a missionary, perhaps a Canadian white missionary, and when he came down to that place and saw him, he also passed by on the opposite side. Then there was a Muslim who was traveling that way. He came up to him, and when he saw him, he had compassion. And he came up and bandaged his wounds with clean linen and disinfectant. He strapped him onto his own motorcycle and brought him to a motel and took care of him. On the next day, he took out 1,000 pesos and gave them to the manager and said, "Take care of him, and whatever you spend in addition, I will repay you when I return." Which of these three do you suppose became a neighbor of the man who fell among the robbers? So he said, "The one who showed mercy to him." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." All right, so that's our story. What do you think? Let's start off with how are you feeling? How does the story make you feel? Okay, you can actually talk about it with the people around you, or you can journal silently. How does this story make you feel? It might make you feel warm. Maybe you're drawn to this kind of love. You like it, so it makes you feel warm. You may even feel excited because now you want to go and emulate this kind of love for others. You're excited. Or maybe you're feeling confused. Like, why did the pastor and the missionary, are supposed to be good Christians, why did they just walk by on the other side of the road? What's going on there? Maybe you're even offended because are you saying that Muslims are more compassionate than Christians? That might be a little bit offensive. I don't think I like that very much. But what are you feeling? Okay, there's no right or wrong answers. What are you feeling? So before we move on, I'm gonna actually pause and give us a full 30 seconds for reflection or to discuss with the people around you. Even just one word, share with people around you. How does this story make you feel? And if you want to explain, go ahead. If not, that's fine. Let's take a pause. All right, let's continue our reflection. Um, those are all valid feelings that you have. They come from different experiences, from different thoughts, but they're all valid feelings. So let's keep those with us as we continue to reflect. I have another question for us. So this is a Jewish story told by a Jew to a Jewish audience. So why does it not have a Jewish protagonist? Why did Jesus make the protagonist a Muslim? Why is it the good Muslim? You know, it should have been a Jew, or for us, it should have been a Christian. It should have been the pastor or the missionary, should be the good guy in the story. But instead, it's the Muslim was the good guy. Why is the Samaritan, why is the good neighbor a Muslim? Okay, you can actually, let's take some time to discuss this question. You can go, maybe even form small groups. That would be even better. Or just talk to your neighbor. Discuss some of these possible answers. Why did Jesus change the protagonist? I'm going to give us another minute or two to actually do that discussion, and then we'll come back. All right, well, I know that wasn't nearly enough time to discuss everything, but I hope that maybe you're able to pause the video, or if not, there are many right answers to this question, and some of those possible answers that you probably have already been discussing as to why did Jesus change the protagonist is because one answer is maybe Jesus was trying to teach us something else other than just how to love, but also who does the loving. Maybe he was trying to teach us humility in not only giving love but accepting love, because we would identify with the Christian rather than Muslim. Now the Muslim was giving me love. Maybe the Muslim represents Jesus, and I'm receiving Jesus' love. That's a possible answer. Another possible answer, of course, is to confront our prejudices. It might be shocking for us to have a parable about a good Muslim. Maybe it's more natural for Christians to have a parable about a bad Muslim and a good Christian. But that little twist there might serve as just enough of a shock for us to question, oh, maybe Muslims can actually be good. Maybe love should and can go beyond racial lines. That's another possible answer to that question. Yet another possible answer to this why did he change the protagonist is perhaps Jesus meant it as a rebuke to the organized religion of the day. In the original, of course, it was the priest and the Levite that walked by on the other side. But for us, it's kind of like the pastor and the missionary, or whoever is the people with Christian offices. They passed by on the other side, and so Jesus is saying maybe those people with Christian offices are not always the best examples of love. Maybe it's those people that we despise can actually be a better example of love for us. So that might be a critique of organized religion as well. So those are the only answers. There are many more answers that could go there, but those are just three possibilities. I want to move on to yet another question that I think is at least as interesting, and that is, did you notice that Jesus changed the question? Okay, the original question, what was the original question? It was, teacher, who is my neighbor? He said, who is my neighbor? He wanted to justify himself, so he asked that question. And Jesus responded with a parable, and at the end of the parable, his question was, who was a good neighbor to the man? Who was a good neighbor to the man who was beaten and left at the side of the road? That was Jesus' question. He never answered the original question about who is my neighbor, not directly anyway. In fact, so instead he replaced it with a different question. Why did Jesus change the question from who is my neighbor to who was a good neighbor to the man? Okay, I'm going to give us another few minutes to answer that question. Let's get back into our small groups or chat with your neighbor, and let's see if we can come up with some wisdom here. All right. Well, once again, I realize that I didn't give you nearly enough time to really discuss these questions, but hopefully you at least got a start into these. And let's continue on to see what this could mean for us. So again, there's a few possible, several possible right answers to this. One answer could be as to why did Jesus change the question? With perhaps the most obvious answer is, well, because the question was the wrong question. And there's a good argument to be made for that. He's asking, who is my neighbor? And Jesus says, the question you're asking is the question of narrowing down love to be at the smallest it can be. Rather, what I want to ask is, how can we maximize love? How can we maximize compassion? And how can we break across these lines? And how can we, so Jesus asks, who was a good neighbor to the man? What does it look like to love well? That's the question you should have been asking. So in a sense, that's what Jesus is saying to the seminary professor is, don't ask the question that will limit your love. Ask, how can we love more? How can we love best? So that's one answer, is that maybe the question was the wrong question to begin with, so Jesus had to change it in order to teach. Of course, another answer to this question, possibly, why did Jesus change the question? Because of the man's motives. So remember, the seminary professor, Luke actually tells us, he wanted to justify himself. So he asked, who is my neighbor? And of course, Jesus would have sensed that. He wanted to justify himself. So that's interesting. Why did he do that? Because he knows the greatest commandment, actually. He knows that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. But maybe he also knows that there are some people that he is not loving well. Maybe it's the Samaritans, or for us, maybe we're not loving the Muslims well. And so we want to ask, who is my neighbor? So that maybe we can get that narrowed down, get that nailed down, so we can focus our efforts on just loving the people who are close to us. And therefore we will be justified. So then Jesus changed the question and told this whole parable because of the motive. He was challenging the wrong motives. That's another thing. And a third possibility, which is also related to those last two, was just that there was more that Jesus wanted to teach this professor, this seminary professor, other than who is my neighbor. He wanted to teach him really what is the meaning of love my neighbor. And so he didn't just answer who is, he implicitly answered it, actually. We see the Muslim man showed love to presumably the Jewish or the Christian man who was not a Muslim. Why did he do that? That was kind of extreme. That was kind of unexpected love. He was a good neighbor to that man. And so therefore it challenges our concept of good neighborliness. And it challenges our concept of how are we loving the people who are culturally and perhaps religiously distant from us. So there was just more that Jesus wanted to teach other than just who is my neighbor. So he told that whole parable. So, and anyway, again, yeah, there are more right answers to this question, but I hope that reflection was helpful for us. There is one final question that I have for us, and this is going to be our challenge for the day. Okay, so the original story, of course, would have actually been quite defensive, of course, to the legal expert that Jesus was talking to, who would have much more readily identified with the Levite and the priest and Levite, or which is the pastor and the missionary. So rather than the Samaritan or the Muslim guy. So, and I wonder even if the way in which they passed by on the other side of the road, was it conscious or subconscious? I wonder if they just sort of saw the man lying at the side of the road and they just almost out of habit, without even thinking about it, just, oh, I need to go the other way. Maybe they thought he was dead already. They couldn't help. Maybe they assumed that maybe they didn't want to think about it. Maybe they were late for a meeting. Who knows what their excuse was. But they didn't do what the good Muslim did, who also could have had all those. The Muslim might have been late to a meeting too. I mean, the Muslim had an additional excuse, which was that man is not, one of my own kind. You know, good riddance if he dies. He could have said that, but he didn't. Um, so the priest and the Levite, or the pastor and the missionary, they knew the law, but they didn't know the law. Okay? Like the legal expert that Jesus was talking to, like the seminary professor that Jesus was talking to, they knew the right answer: love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. But apparently they didn't know it in their hearts because they didn't stop to show love to that man. All right? So how about us? In what ways are we passing by on the other side? Okay? In what ways might we, and I'm not saying literally now, as in that, you've seen a man beaten half and half dead on the side of the road. But are there ways that we structure our lives in such a manner that we avoid bumping into people who are suffering? That's the question. Are there ways in which our church services are organized, or ways in which our jobs, our education, or our homes, or anything about the way that we go about our lives are organized such that it lets us avoid the people who are suffering, beaten, and left half dead, figuratively, on the side of the road? Okay, that's the challenge for us. And now I would like to suggest that there are many categories of people who are suffering. Of course, there are two in particular that I want to bring to our attention, that I think that we as a society, perhaps even the whole world round, have been avoiding, and we structure our churches and we structure our lives in a way to avoid it. And that is the poor and the Muslims. Okay, and even more specifically, the unreached urban poor. Okay, the unreached urban poor. So how are we avoiding these people? So, well, one major suspect is subdivisions. Subdivisions, like only middle class and rich people live in subdivisions. Poor people generally don't. They live in apartment buildings, or they live in slums, like the one that I'm living in. When you live in a subdivision, all the people you bump into are likely going to be your class of people, middle class and above, and your coworkers when you go to work, and people who shop at the same places that you shop. So you're not likely to just happen to run into people who are poor if you live in a subdivision. So that's one structural thing that lets us avoid poor people. And there are many ways, even the ways that our cities are designed. Oftentimes they're very much designed to kind of cordon off the poor people, and even cordon off different cultures, like the Muslims. That's why we have things like like Chinatown or Little Italy. There's cultural pressures it kind of focus these enclaves into certain spots. So Canadian Christians usually don't know Muslims, and Canadian middle class people very rarely get to know the names of poor people because of all the barriers that are in place. Now, I'm not saying that this is no one individual's fault that these barriers exist, but I'm saying that these barriers, that they do exist, that they are real, they are systemic, and that we need to pay attention to them. Okay? So this is going to lead us into a discussion about move in. All right? This is the movement that we are a part of, and for us, move in is our kind of response to this. And even for me personally, my way of refusing to pass by on the other side of the road is by doing move in. It's by moving in and living among the people. Intent rather than avoiding that side of the street, it's intentionally crossing back over to the side of the street where there are people who are suffering and there are people who need Jesus. So, but before I say more about that, I'm actually going to pause this.
So again, we apologize. It's a bit of an abrupt ending there, but you hear his heart. And we'd invite you this week to open the link to the restricted access video where he will explain more in depth the work that he's involved in, he and Veron, in Philippines with Move In. Yeah, it was a good word, wasn't it?